any connections or suggestions, let me know. But we need to get some people out to listen and to get excited about this, because this could be huge for Nevada. That's about it.
Okay, I was just taking a picture of the handsome group here.
Okay. Well, I'll be listening. I hope you guys ask a lot of questions.
Okay. So just a question for the group. We had a checkoff list. Is there anyone who doesn't recall seeing me or checking in yourself when you came in? Okay, I got you. Can I just get that? Okay, so it's 4:22. We're doing good. I think they're both signed in. We're going to pass the mic around, and this is mainly what we're doing video of this event, so that way you can reference who was in here. You can hear any questions they might have had. You can see the presentation. So it's kind of important for a reference, and this has worked out really well with other events that we've had. Where people have gone back and referenced the video to see who that person was that they wish they had talked to. So, and probably if you take about 15, 20 seconds, just say your name, your company, and what your interest is, or what your company does, or what you do, however those things you want to squeeze in there. So we just need to be, to stick with our schedule, 4:45 to do that. So I will get one of our mics. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Okay, we'll start right down here. Whether she's still eating.
Good afternoon. My name is Julie Herford. I am part of the Nevada's CAN and member of the Energy Security Action Committee.
My name is Mary Rooney, and I am also with Nevadans CAN, which is Nevada's Citizen Action Network. And we are in, one of the issues that we are very involved in is the whole Yucca Mountain and small modular reactors, nuclear energy, and that's why I'm here today.
All the way from Anaheim.
My name's Errol Naiman. I'm with a company called Application Specific Computers. We are addressing perimeter security, particularly for our steer bases for the U.S. Air Force, and we're interested in these small nukes to see whether they could be suitable for some of the foreign theater applications.
Good afternoon. My name's Ed McSwain. My company's Terra Contracting, and we build infrastructure systems.
Hi, I'm Bob Frank. I'm your main speaker for the evening, and my background is 20 years in the Air Force in logistics and computers, and then retired from Livermore also lab as a computer scientist, and been working on this problem of military independence of power ever since I was in Vietnam in '69. So it's a burden. And I'm really glad to see you all here tonight because this is really a very, very special meeting.
Good afternoon. I'm Shelley Hartman. I'm from Hawthorne, Nevada. I'm the Economic Development Director, but I'm also, we have a 16,000 acre industrial park on the Hawthorne Ammunition Depot, and I need to power it up, and I'm tired of fighting with NV Energy.
My name is Tony Baca, and I have a company called the One Source Group, and I'm associated with a company out of Canada that does gas recapture systems to capture the flares off the oil wells. So basically clean energy oriented. So I was invited here by my friend, and enjoy the time. Seeing you again. Good seeing you again, Frank.
My name is Karen Samuelson. I'm a citizen.
Citizens will reap the benefits of this project when it comes out into the civilian world. Okay, so if you're associated with ANS, let us know. Known this guy for a long time.
Thank you, Marty. I'm Greg Friesmuth. I'm a businessman, entrepreneur. I like to do tech businesses, and I'm interested in commercializing nuclear energy.
Hi, I'm Bruce Ward, and I'm a semi-retired technology evangelist, and I'm just curious. I was actually invited here by a friend who, unfortunately, at the last second couldn't make it. But
I'm Richard Nelson with BET Environmental Inc. 20 years in the Air Force. I know what we need here. I've been trying to get it for some time. We were involved with Yucca Mountain. We're doing a lot of permitting and siting for nuclear and renewable energy. So that's my interest.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Robert Rupert. Early on in my life, I had the pleasure of living with the Getty family, and George Getty was the one who hired me to work at the oil company in downtown Los Angeles. The one thing I thought that was truly unique was inside the symbol for Getty Oil was the nuclear power sign inside of the G, and that was what always interested me in energy. Not so much at the oil, even though I worked in the industry for over 10 years. I ended up moving to Las Vegas. I worked on the Yucca Mountain project, hired by Stephen Bodner out of TRW in tech data management. And if you ever saw any of the documents were posted on the website for the DOA on the project, I was the one who did the proofreading.
Good evening, Dave Austin, National Cost Recovery Services. We're a savings consultancy. We go into businesses and we find money internal to your business.
Good afternoon. My name is Robert Shawhan. I'm a retired aviator, an entrepreneur, and a home builder, and a developer. And I currently run a boarding house for the benefit of Steve Curtis.
Hi, my name is Walt Wext. I'm retired now, but I've been in the nuclear business for all of my life. I have a master's degree from the University of Michigan and a PhD in health physics from the University of Michigan, neither one of which helped me find this place tonight. My last, I don't know what to say, my last big volunteer job was I was chairman and vice chairman of the Citizens Advisory Board for the old Nevada test site before it became the, what is it now, the Nevada Nuclear Security Site, something like that. But when it was the Nevada test site, I was very active on the Citizens Advisory Board.
Hi, my name is Kathleen Peterson, and I was actually one of your contractors a while back. Okay, worked out from Lockheed and Loral. That's how long ago this was. And we had at that time 3.1 million acres because we included everything from what you call Creech now, was Indian Springs then, and it went all the way to Tonopah. So we were responsible for your targets. We were responsible for making your pilots happy. And I too was the leader on the Citizens Advisory Board for some number of years, and have stuck with the Air Force in a long, long, long time frame. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Sam Dadu. I've been with the Department of Energy and the headquarters of Forstal for about 35 years, plus a few other agencies in the Tyson Corners quadrant. I'm interested in this particular topic because I've been watching this since the first Portsmouth reactor in the 50s. Currently, I'm a director of a company called Non-Proliferation Lexicon of Weapons of Mass Destruction, which basically seeks to understand the adversary and the enemies, regardless of where they are, and try sort of to work a last chance before a decision is made and sent to our other forces to maybe finish that issue. I also like to say that I spent too many years working with the Department of State as well. And currently, if you allow me, I'll be interested if anybody who has a graduate degree and knows the dialects of Pakistan, India, North Korea, the Middle East, and Russia, please talk to me. Thank you.
Hi, Greg Idy. I'm URS, an AECOM company. We work on the ranges in every aspect of support in Nevada and the unmanned systems at Creech.
Hello, my name is Paul Guss. I'm a scientist with Mission Support and Test Services. That's the Honeywell LLC. That's the management and operations contractor for the Nevada National Security Site. I'm also an ANS member.
Hi, my name is Richard Helfridge. My company is Alameda Advisors, Inc. We do international mergers and acquisitions and big companies. My interest in this is I actually got my first degree in particle physics, and suddenly there were no more nuclear activities going on back in those days, and I went back and did an MSCE and degrees in chemistry and biochemistry, and ended up not using those either and going into businesses. I did a NASDAQ startup. I did a NASDAQ turnaround.
Good evening. My name is Bill Lobb. I'm a citizen like this young lady here. I've been in Las Vegas since 1958, retired utility worker working at Southwest Gas for 40 years. Very interested in the topic.
Good afternoon, Mason Harvey. I'm a broker salesman with Berkshire Hathaway here in town, but I also manage and have I'm a principal in several partnerships that we have, one of them being in and around Apex. We've got a few hundred acres out there, but we also have an apartment home project we're working on in Indian Springs. I think somebody mentioned they were there or knew of it, right? So we're interested in how we might be able to work with potentially these businesses that are going to provide this, and maybe even that 3,000 feet of power run we've got to do to service our project. Maybe this will help us bring that cost down.
Hi, I'm Linda Buckard. I hail from Minnesota as an educator there, master's in teaching, learning, and ELL, and I'm very interested in energy, and I've been to the PUC many times. Thank you. Nevadans can.
Sorry. Yes, we can. I'm Nanette Damasio. I am a NDIA member. I represent Ascena Consulting. We help business owners recover income tax money using research and development credits and other government programs.
My name is Denise Mraz, and recently Dennis Hoff passed, but he prevailed in his chase for the seat for AG 36. I'm hoping to throw my hat in the ring, and not only is Creech, but Yucca Mountain would be in my district. I'm extremely happy that we have this meeting here, and we want to build some momentum around getting nuclear, especially SMR, into Nevada.
My name's Frank O'Donnell. I'm the chairman of K2 Energy in Henderson, Nevada.
We manufacture lithium ion phosphate batteries, and we're the supplier for the Navy on the railgun.
Hey, good evening, Doug Tippett. I'm the Air Base Group Commander out at Creech, so I'm responsible for all the installation, responsible for providing power and water and sewer and comm and all that to all the RPA enterprise. So very, very interested in anything we do for energy assurance and resiliency out there.
Evening, Major Charles Comfort. I'm Colonel Tippett's right-hand man on providing civil engineer support at Creech Air Force Base. I have a civil engineering background and glad to be here.
Hi, my name is Reza Karamuz. I head up a company called Global Robot and Drone Deployment. We analyze sensor data, and we also promote STEM education throughout the state of Nevada, bring aviation, aerospace, and drones to youth. We run all the youth programs at the Reno Air Races. This year we had 6,000 students go through our program. Next year, we invite you to come to the Reno Air Races, where the awesome Thunderbird team will do their demonstration. And we will have about 6,000 square feet under tent with, maybe 20 flight simulators, 20 ground robots, all kinds of other cool technology for youth to experience. Thank you.
My name is Frank Michael. I'm a Senior Vice President for Programs and Membership at NDIA. After listening to all of you talk, I feel like I have to get a job. I gotta get a purpose in life here. But I've been at NDIA for about 2 years. I'm just really pleased. I've known Marty for the last year. We're very proud to help stand up this chapter here. Just thrilled to be here with you tonight.
Hey everybody, I'm Tanya Coogan. I'm with NDIA as well. I'm Frank's right-hand man. I'm the Director of Chapters and Membership at NDIA.
Good evening. My name is Reggie Richardson. I'm President of Sapphire Innovative Solutions. I'm also a board member with NDIA chapter here for STEM. And in addition to that, I am a contractor under MSTS for the Nevada National Security Site to improve the infrastructure or engineering for maybe some upcoming revitalization work for maybe Yucca Mountain. Who knows?
I'm Darrell Johnson. I work for a company called Scientific Research Corporation. We are a defense contractor in the local area. Currently, I'm supporting AECOM underneath the Western Range contract.
Hey, my name is Travis Whidden. You guys have a lot of acronyms I don't know. I have a CTO for a company, eConnect, here in Las Vegas. We're a data analytics company. We essentially provide analytics software for casinos all the way around the world. Nothing to do with this. I'm actually here on my own personal interest because I'm part of the Nevada CAN group. And when they said, nuclear reactors and microgrids, military use, I thought that was pretty damn interesting. So I'm here for that. And hopefully we'll see on the community side, not just in the military use. So.
My name is Chris Shape. I'm like these fine people, just a civilian here. He told me about this. It sounds very interesting. I'm very willing to learn on this stuff, and I want to see what's out there. I currently am a fabricator and an entrepreneur.
Hi, my name is Richard Bray, and I just came here to see a good presentation today.
I'm Dave Radcliffe, and I'm the chapter treasurer. I'm also a civic leader for the Chief of Staff of the Air Force.
Hello, my name is Craig Smith. Hi. And I'm a nuclear scientist. My day job is as a professor at the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, but I actually live in Reno, and I'm part of the Nevadans CAN group, where I serve as the Chief Technology and Science Advisor.
My name's Joanne Lemming. I am a STEM advocate. I'm an NDIA member, and it's wonderful to be here and hear this.
I'm Gil Waldman. I used to be a licensing engineer on the Yucca Mountain project, and I'm presently a consulting engineer down at Sandia National Labs. And during that time and into the future, I'm always going to be Marty's brother.
Hello, my name is Jim Marchant, Nevada State Assemblyman, and I am advancing the entire narrative that you would see today in Washington.
I'd clap for you too, but I already clap for you all the time. My name is Nikki Fuller.
I'm part of Nevadans Can. I also do public relations, media management, so I'm helping to promote this throughout the nation and to the people that might want to hear about our project. I think it can really help Nevada, and I advocate those things that can help posture us in a better position economically. And I just think it's time that we took care of things like securing the grid, desalinization, projects like that that can grow out of this whole conversation we're having today. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Ronald Solomon. I am also a member of Nevadans Can. I'm the president of U.S. Patriots, a constitutional conservative group that supports conservative causes and candidates. I am also the director of membership for the Real Chamber of Commerce of Las Vegas, Nevada. Also, by trade, I'm an investment banker. I raise funds for small, intermediate, and large corporations.
Good evening, I'm Alex Barzilov, nuclear engineering professor at UNLV and INS member.
Yes?
Oh.
Now we have three, yes. So did everybody sign in? Did you get checked off on the list? I'll make sure we got you all. Because you're the ones who will first get the email. Okay, so Steve, you're on there still, I guess, right?
Yes, I'm here. I just have it on mute, so.
Okay.
That's good.
Yeah, just a quick synopsis of you.
Okay, my name is Steve Curtis. I've been involved with all kinds of outreach programs in Southern Nevada, most particularly now in Nevadans Can and the American Nuclear Society Nevada section. And it's our intent to try to make Nevada a very top of the line technical state through the use of the kind of technology you're going to hear tonight. But we're also trying to encourage the Nevadan citizens in general to take an interest in nuclear and reap the benefits thereof. So my goal is to have a seminar series as part of what's going on. And on April 3rd, I'll be talking to the first, Joe Brown's First Wednesday group. And actually we'll have Bob Halstead from the state of Nevada on the same stage. So that should be very interesting. And we appreciate it if all you guys could make a point to start coming out to these things and start rallying the troops and start really making this a big deal. But that's what my background is, and that's what I'm all about right now. Thanks, Marty.
Okay, great, Steve. So, and is the audio quality good for you? You're able to hear everything pretty well?
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
that's
good.
Great.
Great. Okay, so just real quick about me, even a few months ago, if you'd asked me if I'd be working in the nuclear area, I wouldn't have ever thought that would happen. I come from a missile and rocket background. I was first with the Navy in Crystal City, Washington, D.C. Cruise missile program when it first started in 1977. Stayed there till 1982, then came out to Vandenberg Air Force Base for the Space Shuttle program, which ended about 4 years later when the Challenger blew up. So, but I stayed at Vandenberg, whole missile and rocket background, helped start a company with my great friends since that time. We build, long story in between, but tracking systems for missiles and rockets. We're on all Atlas and Delta vehicles with our tracking system, so they could shut down tracking radars. And also lithium polymer batteries for aerospace applications, missiles and rockets, small satellites, and very interested in having Las Vegas become a spaceport with my other organization, the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, so that's ongoing. We still have to work more politics here in the area. But NDIA began this January will be a year ago, and surprising we didn't have it in the area. And it's been quite a journey over this past year to assemble this. And then about a month and a half ago, while we were up at Creech, and we're going around the room, Bob knows the story, and talking to Colonel Cheater, and he wanted to know what we all do. And so Bob's turn came, and I still hear it. I wish we had it recorded, but I can still hear it. And Bob mentioned about this effort. And Colonel Cheater basically said, wow, you need to brief me on that. This is, we haven't got to brief him personally, but we have that representation here, and this is, we consider that this is briefing, and he can watch the video too. So Bob brought this up, and I just immediately, some things you kind of know are correct. And I just knew that this was a total win-win for Nevada. The whole history of people working here to make great things happen, and we've had some slow starts. And this possibility that Bob raised with this concept, I never even heard of small nuclear reactors. And it opened up the whole concept for me, and the microgrids, of which really the reactors are the power source for. And it's really the microgrid, because we hear everybody say, we got to get off the grid. It's like, well, that's a big grid. I think like 3 big grids as he'll get into. But now we have the possibility to have thousands and thousands of small grids, microgrids, throughout the country, independent and resilient. And this is the big picture. So it's answering a huge question that's been out there for a long time. And what a perfect beginning to have Creech in our backyard, who has this 24/7 mission. If they lose power for a couple days, if the grid goes down, pretty soon I think the fuel supply will kind of dwindle. And this is a great opportunity for them to keep in operation for 30 years past that point when the grid goes down. So when you think about it, if the grid went down for more than a couple of days, chances are we really need to be flying their missions overseas. So this is very important. It'd be like having your computer at home and no ups in case the power went out and you lose that 20-page document you've been working on. This is very important. So this got me very excited. It's a real project, and very happy to work it. Briefed Frank about this, and he immediately, within a day of him talking to General Carlisle, who's head of NDIA, General Carlisle said, hey, this has been on his mind. He's talked to people for quite a while about this, but the technology wasn't quite there, whatever. So now we're at that point where the technology is coming about where we can do this. So we have total support up to headquarters, NDIA, and they, of course, have a great political voice there that we can work with. They're in D.C. Both Frank and Tanya are here from D.C. They made the big trip to come out for this. So it's really appreciated. So we'll get into my slides. I forgot to ask how you make this thing work. See if, well, there we go. Okay, so I've always worked for the military. I've never been in the military, but I saw this sculpture, and this, I feel like I know these people. This captured the whole spirit of what it's like to me to be in a war situation. And it's basically a little inset. So there's the whole statue with the 3 men on the left. And the 2 of them, you can tell they're in a very tense combat situation. And wow, you think about that. This sculpture is just amazing. And then, of course, the 3rd soldier there has been wounded or killed, I'm not sure. But the guy in the back is carrying him along. And if you take a look on their faces and you look at the sacrifice that these people have done in the real world with combat, there's been a whole history of this. You know, you look back at wars for hundreds or thousands of years, Civil War, World War I, which we just had the 100-year anniversary of, the trench warfare, like just living hell. And but the bottom line is all these soldiers, they needed industry to produce what they needed for their best survival when they're out there. So you look at these guys, you know, they have their helmets that are hoping are going to keep them safe on top, and they have their guns that they're hoping are going to work within the realm that they need to work, and their uniforms, you know, they depend on what's produced by industry when they're out there defending us. And so I asked the big question, why NDIA? And they didn't have NDIA back then. Well, actually, it's been around about 100 years, I just learned, but in different forms. But the whole mission of what it's about is to bring out the best in industry and to produce the best products for these people. Now, warfare, we still have combat troops like this, but also, boy, you think back Civil War, World War I, World War II, did they ever dream that a number of soldiers would be sitting on the other side of the world commanding their forces? And that's what we're here talking about today. So basically, the way you need the helmet and the gun and the uniform and all your support equipment, these people up at Creech need dependable power. This is their tool. Without dependable power, it's like going out there without a helmet or a gun. They can't do their job for very long. And that's why we're here today. So everything we talk about, just kind of remember the looks on their faces and what's going on. If we can't fly these missions, basically the agony and whatever you feel from this is really of the country not being able to get the support that it needs to defend, to be defended. So very powerful. Hope you're kind of getting the same vibes off of this that I get. I just, it makes me cry when I see it and makes me want to get up here and do what we're doing. So anyway, it's very powerful. It's the person that sculpted that is incredible. So anyway, so kind of as I just mentioned, NDIA, we have our little logo here, but we've added the little atom on there as part of our mission. To the airplane to the right represents Nellis, the one on the left is Creech, and then we have the combination of atomic power here, which Nevada is very well known for, and now we need to harness that atom for carrying on that mission for what Creech needs to do, and in support of the United States. We're well positioned, Nevada, to do this. So same thing, what's in red, to assure the highest quality capability for the warfighter. And if we don't have a robust power system, we're not supplying the highest quality capability for the warfighter. And so here in Nevada, with our chapter, this is our specialty. We are here to support Nelson Creech in whatever way we can. And ended on the bottom, Creech's ability to be power independent for RPA operations is critical. Okay. So came up with a little thing here I'm just really trying to put across the message as powerfully as possible. We need you all to be soldiers for this effort. You know, again, the world has changed. A lot of our war fighting can be done from the other side of the world. Amazing. And those people go home to their families at night. How amazing is that? Same way, we're sitting in this room, we go home, but we are the support warriors for this effort here to make this happen in Nevada. We need to come together for this. And as I look out on everybody, I just get this thought that you all can be the nucleus of this effort of soldiers, civilian soldiers, to back this and take this forward whatever way that you can to make this happen, because we need it for the United States. And with that, Frank Michael is going to come up and say a few words with Tanya. Do you both want to come up together? Okay, so Frank Michael, all the way from good old Washington, D.C. I guess if you just lean into it there.
Marty, thank you. Tanya's coming up. There she is. Oh, okay. Thought you were coming up. Hey, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much, Marty. Thank you for the invitation for us to come out. We got on an airplane this morning at 8 o'clock at Reagan National and sat there for 2 hours waiting for the de-ice truck to come around. And the pilot got so he was getting annoyed with how slow it was all happening. It was like, hey, they're going to be here any minute. He finally goes, look, these guys are just rusty. They haven't done this for a year, so we got to give them a chance to get out and practice a little bit. But we finally got the de-ice, got the plane de-iced, and here we are. But it is wonderful to be here. And Marty, I have to thank you first for the work you're doing with this chapter. Seems like we just stood this thing up yesterday. It was about a year ago, right? And you and David here and your team have just done a tremendous job. You're plank owners, as we call you in the Navy. You stood this organization up, and you are doing more work than any of the new chapters I have at NDIA and a lot of the chapters that have been around a while. And you're successful because of your leadership, but you're also successful because all of you in this room. This is what makes a chapter successful. And as I sat and listened to this, to all of you introduce yourselves, we have citizens here. Can I call you an activist citizen? I think that's what you are. We have physicists, we have rocket scientists, we have chemical engineers, we've got fabricators, entrepreneurs. This is a cross-section of folks that care and that want to make a difference, and you're all here to support our warfighter. At the end of the day, that's why you're here, and you care about your community. And like I said, I have never seen this sort of cross-section of folks that cared and that wanted to work towards this mission at NDIA of supporting our warfighters as much as I've seen it here tonight. So I thank all of you for that. And that's on my behalf, but it's also on behalf of General Carlisle, our president and CEO, who will be out here in January to join you at WebTAC. And hopefully you'll get a chance to meet him and he'll talk with you. So I'm pleased to be here with Tanya. Tanya's our Director of Chapters, Chapter Relations and Membership. She's going to take great care of this chapter and help you get to the next level. This is good work we're doing. This nuclear reactor, self-contained, I can't talk about it because I'll just screw it up as I try to take you forever to undo everything I say wrong up here, sir. But if you don't think it's important to keep power to the colonel and his warfighters up at Creech, then you're mistaken, and you all get that. It's folks outside of this group that sometimes forget the importance and the fact. And, we got folks fighting the war 24/7, not very far from here. So this is righteous work. We're very proud of you. National's very proud of you, Marty, and we're here anytime you need us. Thank you.
You have to. Tanya is going to come up for a second because she's membership chairman, and we would love to see you all join. This is our way of tying together the Army.
I don't have, I didn't bring membership forms. I totally should have.
I have a bunch.
Oh, do you? Hello, this is why this is my favorite chapter. It's very easy. But yeah, again, just to reiterate what Frank stated, this chapter is just amazing, and the stuff that that Marty is doing and all these. The other side of this is you guys are all volunteers. And one thing that I did was I looked at Frank and said, how many citizens are at this event? And I got to say, I don't know that we have chapters that are doing stuff like this. So again, not to restate everything that Frank said before, but Marty, we're just so proud to have you guys as a chapter of NDIA, looking out at this audience and seeing how engaged you have. And that's exactly what NDIA is supposed to do. We're supposed to convene. We're supposed to convene industry, and citizens and get everybody together to have these types of conversations. So you are doing very important work. We thank you mightily from all the way across the country. And I'm not going to say anything more because I'll screw it up too. So thanks a lot and happy to be here. Thanks.
And just a last plug about membership. If you work for a large company, chances are the company is a corporate member. You can join for free. If you're in the military, you join for free. If you're neither of those, it's a whopping $40 a year. I think it's going up, but we'll hold that $40 price, right? Yeah, so. And you get emails, you keep up with the defense industry in general. They put out a magazine each month, and I think it's the biggest bargain going as far as organization. that I've seen, and I've been with a few of them and still am. So anyway, with that, I think that we see how our time is. Probably 5. So I think we're ready for Bob here. Do you know how this goes? Does this go right into yours?
Get it started?
I don't know. I'm pushing the button. Is it loaded as a separate?
We may need technical help. There we go.
Huh? They're working behind the scenes. Okay. Bob Frank, the man who appeared from nowhere to bring this all to our doorstep. Really grateful for him. And he's just been tremendous working with him. And every conversation is just a new dump of great information, again, that I wouldn't have known about. So he's been working in 20 years in this concept. So this is a great top of the pyramid event for him and everything he's doing. And I think it's the project, the time for this has come. So here he is to educate us all so we can all be soldiers in the Army for this.
Thank you, Marty. As a retired Air Force logistician experienced in the Pentagon, I can tell you that one of the biggest things that burdened the combat commander for years is the ability to support the operations with all the power that they need, and secondarily with potable water and related things in order for the combat force to be able to sustain its operation. And the reason why this has been a burden for me ever since I was in Vietnam. I was in Vietnam for about 3 years in 67 through 69, and we had to live off of diesel power generators 24/7 because Vietnam was not a good place for reliable power, as you might imagine. But the reality is that if you go in any combat situation, reliable power is a critical issue to our success from the base support structure point of view. And what most Americans don't think about very much, because we take our power so for granted. But in reality, I compare electricity to the lifeblood of our civilization. Just like you would never let anybody put a IEV in your arm and you jerk it out and let your blood run all over the ground. Why would you set up your electric grid so that a clever enemy could take it out and you wind up with no electricity? We couldn't do anything without electricity anymore. In the past 100 years, we've become totally dependent on it. So the message tonight, and I'm going to put the foundation together, which talks about the fact that one of the worst scenarios from a warfighter's point of view is the fact that our national security installations are dependent on the same grid that you and I are dependent on at home. And so if we want to protect this country from any kind of internal terrorist attacks or from external ballistic attack, it's known that both North Korea and Iran could drop a ballistic missile over our country. It's not sure that we could stop it, but we probably could, but we're not sure. Speaking as a senior military officer, you never know for sure that anything is guaranteed from a defense point of view. So one of the other hats that I wear is the Nevada in charge of Secure the Grid. And what was a spinoff from that Secure the Grid investigation about 4 or 5 years ago, working with Frank Gaffney and others in Washington, was the clear fact that getting the national security system off the grid was a critical factor, because just making everything protected against what's called EMP threats against our electrical grid was probably not feasible. It's actually more feasible to think of distributing our power system than it is to protect the one we have which is obsolete. So that brings to bear on the key issue, well, why haven't we done this before? Because it's so obvious. I mean, there are thousands of papers been written from an academic point of view on what should be done, how it could be done, but nothing is implemented because the political process stops it cold with a few people, just a handful of people, who are against all things nuclear, it appears. And so what we've done, and what you see introduced on this slide, is the idea of a carbon-free energy center of excellence in Nevada could help pull together the piece parts that's necessary in order to get the end result done. It's like almost anything else that's really worthwhile. It's not easy, it's complicated. Everything in our world today, including our cell phones, are complicated. But we have people that make them work. And the challenge to our community here in Nevada is to help establish or reestablish the leadership of the National Test Site with Nevada's academic institutions and with our business community, and simply say we need to go to the next step, and that is to help use the technology and the expertise we have in Nevada to pull this thing together into a systems approach as to the piece parts. And what I'm talking about from that point of view is, first of all, I'm just going to remind you, since most of you don't know, you've never heard of Nevada's CAN, probably, the Citizen Action Network. Julie Herford and I started it with Jim Marchant's help almost 2 years ago when President Trump was elected, saying, well, you know, maybe there's something could be done here, and we ought to get a can-do, action-oriented, no BS type organization going that's actually committed to changing things and not just talking about them. And so that's what Nevada's CAN is all about, is action-oriented solutions. This energy program for energy security is one of our major programs, committees. It's not the only one. We have a number of other things that we're working on, but they're all synergistic from this point of view. It's about supporting the Constitution, supporting our American way of life, supporting our basic way of how we achieved what we've done in America over the last 200 plus years, and keep it going and do what we can. So the energy security aspect is simply say, what's wrong with the picture? When all we ever read about in the newspaper is Yucca Mountain this and Yucca Mountain that and Yucca Mountain something else, and you never read anything good about nuclear energy. You never read anything good about what the future could bring in terms of environmental help as well as from national security. So you're going to learn something about that tonight, and that's what we're going to talk about. Basically, our Energy Security Action Committee is building and notice that Nevada's CAN is a citizen action network. We're not trying to compete with NDIA or with American Nuclear Society or with anybody else. We're trying to add value and build networks of like-minded people interested in similar objectives and get people to pull together in the same direction. And that's a whole lot easier than trying to compete and be the smartest and brightest and most powerful among all the nonprofit companies that are out there trying to do things. And so far, so good. And that's why I was so excited when I met Marty, because I knew of NDIA for many years as a logistician. I knew that NDIA was a powerful force, but it's like everything else. It needs to be helped to understand what it can do. And Marty was, with his experience, knew exactly what I was talking about when I talked about teaming with Nevada's CAN and also teaming with American Nuclear Society and the Test Museum and the National Test Center and Creech and other people that have interests in seeing solutions presented. It's not just about raw politics. It's not just about raw business. It's about a systems approach, and that's what I hope you take away from this evening. So, proceeding on. When we get to the end today, by the way, I'm gonna lay the foundation and end up talking about Creech in more detail as we get halfway through. So bear with me as I go through this process. Okay.
It's a push for nuclear power.
Can you hear that?
Understand, you cannot afford to lose power. So what's it worth?
A question U.S. Secretary of Energy Rick Perry asks citizens. He made a stop in Oswego County to tour the James Fitzpatrick nuclear power plant, joined by Congressman John Katko. Their goal? To stress the importance of nuclear energy. They say it all comes down to the 3 E's: electricity,
Making sure that we
Now, I'm going to stop it right there and simply say to you, I'm going to have Jim Marchant talk a little about some political experiences he's had in the foundation of support, because 99% of the time when I talk to people about this, they say, oh, you can't do this. The politics are totally against you. It's impossible. We don't buy it. Some people think we're a little crazy. We're not. But we're working on it behind the scenes, and Jim Marchant's going to help us show what he's done up till now and what we intend to do in the future. But with the help from Secretary Perry and with President Trump and with many other people in the Defense Department, Secretary Mathis, who has a long-standing, he carries that burden of trying to protect the war fighters with better energy solutions almost as long as I have. And so the point I'm trying to make to you, and then I'll resume this, is that there are people on our side, and when I say our, I mean everybody in this room. There are people on our side that you don't know about because the media never talks about what the alternative options are. They only talk about, oh, we don't want Nevada to be a dump. We don't either. We don't want Nevada to be a dump. We'll get to that in just a second. But the point is, it's not about turning Nevada into a waste dump. It's talking about the energy future for this nation and for the world, and why are we allowing that issue to not be resolved the way it should be resolved and move forward. So, backing up.
it's a
We'll
push
start
for
this
nuclear
again.
power.
governments understand you cannot afford to lose power. So what's it worth?
A question U.S. Secretary of Energy Rick Perry asks citizens. He made a stop in Oswego County to tour the James Fitzpatrick nuclear power plant, joined by Congressman John Katko. Their goal? To stress the importance of nuclear energy. They say it all comes down to the 3 E's: electricity,
Making sure that we have a resilient grid, a base load of electricity is in the country's national security realm.
By providing good, cheap electricity and sustainable and reliable electricity to the grid.
energy that not only lasts, but does not jeopardize the 2nd E, the environment.
60% of the zero emissions out of America come from nuclear power plants. You cannot have a legitimate conversation about this globe and its environment without being a supporter of nuclear power.
So our basic program has 3 major elements. It has what we call a carbon-free energy center for Nevada. It talks about recycle spent nuclear fuel and quit wasting time talking about whether we're going to have a dump or not, because nobody wants a dump anywhere, anyhow. So it's really dumb to talk about a dump because we don't want a dump. We want to recycle, and we want to reprocess it, and we want to sell it back. And instead of it being $1 billion loss to the taxpayer, it turns into be a major profit center for the state of Nevada. How could you possibly be against that? Oh. And then I'm going to finish up by talking about military power independence, because one of the dumbest things we can do, in my opinion, as a retired military officer, is to allow our national security resources, not just the military, that includes the CIA, that may include many of the law enforcement agencies, but the things that keep us safe in this country, where Fortress America can no longer say, not to worry, We got all these oceans separating us from all the bad guys, so we're not going to have to worry about it. And we won't rely on just mad, mutually assured destruction as the solution to everything. So there has to be a way to make sure that our lifeblood is not drained out and we are unable to function. Because those of you that have studied war history, you will know that we could not have won World War II, we, the Allies, if we hadn't had the production base in this country that made it possible. The production base, the logistics that made it possible to win the war are the main reason why we were able to do that, finished off with the use of selected use of nuclear weapons to have to not invade Japan. So the point is that our electricity today is maybe 1,000 times more important to our survival than it was in World War II. And think of what it's going to be 50 years from now if we live that long. So that's the point. So military power independence is absolutely critical. And somebody says to me, well, what about the civilian part of the grid? Don't they have to survive as well? You bet. But it will come along if the military independence can achieve its objectives. The biggest difficulty we have right now is finally getting something that's productized and deliverable and purchasable and acquirable that the military can use. And having done that, history shows that the civilian applications will come along very nicely in parallel, because that's where the big money will be in the long run. Okay? So we focused on carbon-free energy as a focus for the National Center. This does not encroach upon, it's not intended, let me put it that way, it's not intended to encroach upon all the brilliant people working in Idaho Falls and in New Mexico and in Tennessee and all over the country at the national labs. They all have things to do from a basic research point of view and from a various piece part. But none of them pull it together from an end product solution point of view. And that's what we hope to turn the test facility, the NNSS facility, used to be the test lab, test center. We want to turn that into the Systems Integration Center, Engineering Center for all of the labs, so that and partner with American industry, so that what comes out that we actually use in our military facilities as well as other critical areas is not flawed by backdoors and all kinds of cyber threats that could slip into the engineering and design of the components if it's not built to military specs in the first place and testable and verified that way. Having been a previous procurement officer in Columbus, Ohio, for one of the major divisions there, I can tell you that it's very, very difficult to certify the quality of a lot of these piece parts that go into our military systems. It's very difficult. And I'm quite sure that the engineering that goes into these small modular reactors in the future will become as big a target from a cyber war point of view as anything could possibly be, worse than the cell phone, because it affects more of our civilization. So that's a very important part of why we talk about carbon-free energy before we talk about what about Creech. There are four major pieces of our carbon-free center, and these are the facility sites. I know you can't see some of that from the back of the room, but the first item on there is the Creech Air Force Base pilot site. The second item is nuclear fuel recycling plant. Third item is a spent fuel temporary storage. Fourth item is the Nevada Carbon-Free Energy Park, which has a great deal of industrial involvement. Number 5 is a Joint Center for Carbon-Free Energy Engineering, Testing, and Product Evaluation. And number 6 is a National Laboratory for Nuclear Systems Engineering and Testing in Southern Nevada. Okay, there are a lot of people, and it's no surprise to you, some of you may be thinking to yourself, holy cow, that's really ambitious. How do you ever expect to sell something that big? Well, having in my Air Force experience, I've sold some big programs, and quite frankly, you first got to start with a dream, and then you start defining it, and then you start lining up your coalition, and you make it happen. I wish we had Admiral Rick over here to tell you how he got the submarine nuclear power plant going, because it takes leadership at the senior levels in the Defense Department and the energy, and it takes dedication, and it takes a great deal of scientific expertise to advise the leaders. And we're really happy that NDIA hired General, my mind just went blank, Carlisle. I haven't met him yet, but I look forward to meeting him in January. You couldn't have had a better guy probably running NDIA at this time in this place to help the tactical warfighters achieve their objectives with help from NDIA. That is what I would call a minor miracle. And it would make all the difference in the world if it was a Navy or an Army general who might be just as good from a mental point of view, but supporting Nellis and supporting Creech and supporting this pilot project is going to be a wonderful godsend to have NDIA on part of the team, and I'm really, really thankful that's going to happen. So you'll see that there are some 6 places pointed out on this chart, and by the way, this will be up on the web after we're done in both sites, and so you can peruse it in detail. I have not coordinated this dream locations with anybody except some quiet conversations off the record with a few people saying, is this feasible, okay? This is feasible. It's not approved. It may never be approved. The decision makers are going to decide how much is going to be done, when it's going to be done, and where the money is going to come from. But I will say to you that I've tried to put this thing together so that you could take one or more of these particular items and do them as a separate program if you wanted to. They won't work near as well, it won't work near as fast if you can't get help working the full picture, because they feed on each other in terms of decision making, monies that might be made available, policy people involved in defense, maybe Homeland Security, as well as energy and National Security Council. Yes, I admit to you that it's a little bit crazy to think you can get all these agencies to pull together, but I remind you that we do have a president and we do have a Secretary of Energy that is committed to doing something. Now, I'm going to say, for the record, one of our biggest stumbling blocks to go forward on this kind of an approach is the Department of Energy has not yet changed its policy to support recycling instead of a dump. That has to be done. That has to be done. Either an executive order by the president, a policy regulation by energy, and cooperations from Mr. Simkus from the Congress will need to be done in order to make that happen. It should not be hard. It should be a relatively easy decision to do that, because it saves so much money. We're talking about saving $100 billion, which can't be found for a dump. And we're talking about $40 billion available to DOE to pay for things that could be done to start this project, probably even finish it. In my opinion, that's enough money to entirely do the entire 6 items if they wanted to. But you have to want to. So if there's anybody here in this room that feels like they can help us to get that decision made, the sooner the better, because right now we're wasting a lot of time talking about a dump versus recycling, when recycling is the only possible answer that makes any sense whatsoever. Okay. We do have questions at the end, Robert, if you don't mind. Because if you ask me a question, you'll get me off track. Okay. Anyway, so here on this slide, you see that there's piles of stored materials at hundreds of sites, and the question will be, do you want to move that stuff to the test site at temporary locations and build a reprocessing site at Mercury? And I say absolutely. Absolutely. There are some people in the environmental community that say, well, you could just leave all that stuff at the sites. Just tell them to quit complaining, because it's really not that dangerous. It's really not that hazardous. It's really not that problem. I don't agree with that, but I also agree that it would be a good idea to consolidate it, have one large reprocessing site, build fuel for the next generation reactors at this site. Argonne National Laboratory has said on the record that if you used all of the so-called waste, which is 97% reusable, so it's not really waste, is it? Why would you call something waste that's 97% recyclable and reusable? That's crazy. That's misdirection. So why would you? Argonne National Laboratory says that if you used all of that in the new generation reactors of various types, you could power this whole nation for over 1,000 years. Why would you bury something that would power the whole nation for 1,000 years? It makes no sense at all, does it? But that's what we're presented with. So I'm going to introduce another clip here by Secretary Perry, but I kind of like this chart. It's kind of small to see. It'll be good when you look at it on the web. But basically, what I'm trying to say is the whole world is modernizing their technology, except nuclear. And all the scientists and engineers, like Craig Smith back there, have been dreaming about what you could replace these old light water reactors with in the future, but nobody will let them build anything because of regulations and because of well, basically just pure politics. If you start reading some of the green former members of the Sierra Club and Greenpeace and what have you writings, who are now rejoining the pro-nuclear group, and it's growing really fast. They finally have realized that solar and wind are nice, but they can never replace coal and petroleum. Never. I don't care what kind of battery technology you have. There's some really interesting economic studies that show no matter if you tried to pave the whole country with solar panels, it still wouldn't be able to replace our current baseline power sources. So there will always be probably a place for some solar in the future, but not as baseline power. And people are getting more and more against the notion of how far wind is going to go, but that's a debatable subject, particularly if you're in that business. But if you the point of this chart is the engineers and scientists of this nation, of this world, know how to modernize nuclear power to where it does not have any concerns about environmental impacts, has no concerns about safety, has no concerns about cost. You get to there are well over 3,000 power plants in this country, many more than 3,000. Some are co-ops, some are companies, for-profit companies. But the bottom line is that if you could envision 50 years from now, and I can remember 50 years ago, some of you can't, but I can remember 50 years ago. If you can imagine 50 years in the future where nuclear power is the standard for all of our baseline power, as well as our modular independent microgrids, you now have a completely different standard of excellence and foundation for where we're going to go. And so,
when I was younger, in the 60s, and a lot of kids wanted to go into the nuclear energy field. In my alma mater, there were a lot of young boys and girls who wanted to be nuclear energy engineers. That's not so much the case today because this industry has been strangled all too often by government regulations. But we need, as a country, I think, to again bring us to that place where the nuclear energy is a part of a portfolio and to be able to sell it in great truthfulness and honesty about what it can add to America, both from an environmental standpoint and from a security standpoint.
imagine telling the truth about nuclear power. What a revolutionary idea. I'm sure we would agree that's time to do that. Okay, if you can't see some of these details, but basically there are three major grids within the master grid in the United States, and they have limited connections between the three. You see there's one in the west, there's one in the east, and there's one in Texas. Without going into detail, because this is not the right place, you already probably have thought to yourself, holy cow, Frank, you could make probably 10 briefings on this subject matter. I mean, this is, you're going to cover all this landscape in just one presentation? Well, I want to get you interested. I want to set a foundation, and then we start probing some of these issues in future meetings and future work sessions and committee meetings. But I resisted the temptation to only talk about what Creech needed or what I believe Creech could use, because if you don't have this framework of why they really need it, you get lost among the ground clutter and the political debates. I can't tell you how many times in the past 5 years trying to give presentations, I've gotten diverted to arguing about whether there's any medical risks from Yucca Mountain. And it's really mind-blowing because you can't get past that. The next thing you know, you can't even have a conversation. That's not the issue at all. If you never store things in a dump, then you don't have a medical problem at Yucca Mountain. And the whole idea is you shouldn't have a dump. Anyway, so the point is that there are thousands of power plants in the U.S. grid. In the future, in 50 years, there might be 10,000 power plants, but they're all connected together by a different type of grid connection, some of which exist, some which may not. But I grew up on a farm, dairy farm in central Oklahoma, and I know what wind power is. We had wind power for our cattle, for water pumping. It didn't have electricity. It just blew the windmill and it pumped the water, and electricity was not involved. But we didn't have any solar panels. But I never will forget when the co-op, the Rural Electric Association, came to us one day and put in a light pole in our backyard in the farm community, and it was not a shall we say, an affluent farm. It was just a small dairy farm, 26 cows. But they put this power pole up for free, and it burned all night for free. And I go in and talk to my grandmother and says, how can they do that? She says, well, I don't really understand it, but something tells me they have to have consumption at night, and therefore it serves their purpose to have people using power at night even if we don't charge them for it. Well, that goes back to the basics of how many Americans really understand electricity and understand the power system? And you put power in one end, it has to come out the other end. Sooner or later, it comes out. You don't just park it there unless you have a battery or something like that, but even then you lose quite a bit of the power that you were going to do it. So it gets people bogged down because they don't understand what's going on. They have no idea where these lights came from, but they're used to it, and they sure go crazy if you turn them off, right? So it's a problem. So the point is that from this chart is, do we have legitimate concerns about grid reliability? Well, you don't have to be a military professional to know that if the power went off for the casinos or for us at our homes, that's a problem for Creech and Nellis also. How are they supposed to provide air defense or deploy to any deployment site if their power goes off at the base. Now, sure, they have diesel generators, and sure, they can keep the lights going on for some period of time so that you can land and take off, and the command post will have some power, and maybe the hospital will have some power. But from a functioning point of view, it's not base wide, and it's only dependent upon how long they can run their diesel generators or whatever that they have. If they had a small nuclear power plant, then they wouldn't have to worry about that because they would keep running. It doesn't matter whether the grid is up or not. And that's a good thing. And that's the way it should be done if it truly is a part of our national security. So the second point here is that Nevada doesn't get a fair share of the backup hydropower from the dam. We never have. And I would submit to you, politics being what they are, we never will get it. Can you imagine Los Angeles or California agreeing to give up some of the power in case the power went down? Oh, no chance. It's too bad, Nevada. You should have planned better, right? So anyway, national security sites must have independent power to help perform homeland defense. That's my basic assumption. Is it's crazy to go the rest of the 21st century and not plan to have our national security resources of all types to be separate from the grid. And I'm sure if Nevada Energy has a representative in the audience, they would go ballistic over that statement. But they have to deal with the reality that that one size doesn't fit all for the future. Might have worked in the past, but it's not going to work in the future because of the threats we face in terms of those that oppose us. And there are always going to be countries that oppose us. I don't care which one you want to mention it, but there will always be people that would like to have what we have and would like to take it away. Now, I know you can't read this in the real back, and I apologize for that, but it's one of my most popular charts. I've been using it for over 2 years now, and it does a comparison between carbon-free solar, wind, and advanced reactor power systems. And basically, it's trying to show that for a given base load of a small city, which would be about 225 megawatts of power, in order to support that city, you would need 60,000 acres to do a wind power system. You'd need 2,400 acres to do a solar system, and you only need 15 acres for a small nuclear reactor. But it's much worse than that, because the chart down below says, in addition to those factors, not just land use, but you can use a nuclear reactor to cool and make hydrogen and purify water, but you can't do that with solar and wind. Solar and wind will kill wildlife, birds, animals, insects, plants, and so forth in the millions, but the reactor won't kill any. If you care about that, I grew up on a farm, I care about animals. I care about the desert landscape too. Why would you pave Nevada in order to have solar power for the whole country? It makes no sense at all if you can do it better with small reactors. Damage from natural disasters. Both solar and wind take heavy damage from natural disasters, but I contend that you can establish a small nuclear reactor installation concept buried underground, stabilized to where you wouldn't have to worry about natural disasters affecting the power production. Now, you may still have to worry about, as in Puerto Rico, with the wires, and the wiring is going to have to be dealt with sooner or later. But it's a lot easier to replace the wires than it is to replace the power generators in a timely manner. And also, notice you haven't heard it talked about very much, but I'm a big zealot on transportable as well as fixed reactor technology. Transportable in terms of truck, rail, and air. It is very difficult, and my chief scientist, Craig Smith back there, cautions me every chance he gets, saying, be careful, because some of these reactors, small reactors, are lead cooled instead of water cooled, and they're pretty heavy. they might have a hard time lifting them in a C5A or a C7 or C5B or a C17. And my response is then they should be designed in such a way so they can be airlifted. That's part of the specification. And for that reason, for my military members here, it probably would be a good idea to have a military spec on what the military needs and uses, because my experience in talking to some of these nuclear power companies is such that, I don't know what happened here. There we go. They don't often think about what military criteria would be the most important to them. And I would argue that we need to satisfy the national security requirements as the first design, and then if it needs to be lessened or if it needs to be adjusted, that's a lot easier to do than trying to back in and turn it into a military system later. That's much more difficult. Notice that I really am, I'm sure I'm not surprised that I'm really hard over about the modernization of our grid system from a security point of view should be with American companies and American technology. We should not be buying it from the Russians or the Indians or the Chinese. We should be building it ourselves, and we should make sure that the components are in fact tested to the standards that we normally do on military systems so that we can count on it. Nothing's ever perfect, but it makes a big difference on how close you can come. Availability. One of the things that people sort of take for granted, but they don't like to talk about it, is that both solar and wind are intermittent. They're not available 24/7, 365, and never will be. You can't make the sun shine if there's cloud cover. You can't make the windmills turn if the wind doesn't blow. But you still need electricity. And I would argue that you can't build enough batteries to satisfy all of your contingency exercises on, well, how long are the batteries supposed to last? A week? 2 weeks? How about 2 months? No chance. Makes a lot more sense just to go ahead and do the right thing and do small reactors. Cost. I always get hammered by some communities, particularly our Nevada commission, about, well, it's going to cost too much. We have no idea what it's going to cost. Nobody has any idea what it's going to cost. One of the favorite buzzwords or attacks against those of us in favor of nuclear power or small reactors is, well, nobody will ever buy your recycled nuclear fuel because it'll be too expensive. How do you know? Dr. Smith has tried to get a couple of his students to do some academic papers on what it could cost to sell recycled nuclear fuel. Well, it's impossible to figure that out because it really depends on what kind of recycling plants you build. Depends on how much robotics you use. It depends on when your market will develop. And it also depends on the Department of Energy in terms of what their policy is going to be on whether you have to buy recycled fuel or not. Yeah, right now you can buy it anywhere you want to. So if you want to buy it from a government subsidized source from overseas like Kazakhstan or someplace like that, you can buy it cheaper than you can if it's made in the U.S. If you can use recycled fuel for 1,000 years, why would you mine any more uranium? Doesn't make any sense to mine uranium if you can reuse your recycled material. So you see where I'm going with this thing. Every time you run into an objection, there's a good answer to it if you just really pursue the process, because it can be done and it should be done. Unfortunately, there are not enough people like our group that's trying to solve the problem. They're just trying to publish papers or take a political position or what have you. Okay, moving right along. I look forward to some feedback on this chart when you have a chance to study it a little bit more. That picture on the side here, see the US DOE system over there? That was developed under Dr. Craig Smith's program management, and about 10 years ago or longer, huh? And it was a laboratory project, and there's been some interest in it by Westinghouse, but they've had some better ideas in 10 years, as you might think. So there are other ways of doing it. The thing that really caused me to put it up there, because I'd like to trigger your mind's image here to think in terms of underground installation and sealed installation. That's a sealed underground concept of a nuclear reactor. Wow, that is really powerful. That is really powerful, including internal, and some options could include the actual steam generator, which means that you could be, all you got to do is take the steam out of it and run it through the power generator, and you're in business, okay? Now, one of the disadvantages, and I'll admit it up front, it's not even close to powering what the major nuclear power plants can do today. It's not even close. But so what? Just because, you know, Dr. Smith tells me that there are some economies of scale that says the bigger power generators may still be needed for places like Chicago and New York and some of these bigger cities, because it just makes more sense to have them, and they need to work on that particular problem. Growing up on a small farm in Oklahoma, I have a tendency to worry more about small communities like Elko and places like that need independent power without having to buy it across state lines and be hostage to all kinds of other regulators and pricing and so forth. So I will admit to you that the large for-profit energy companies like Nevada Energy will not like this idea at all. But they haven't liked it for 40 years. I mean, this is not new. There's been a lot of people spending a lot of money to make sure this never happens. But we just can't afford to let it drift anymore. We've got to do something about it now. Okay, this is kind of a complete new chart here that is a conceptual view of a microgrid with microreactor power system. You see in the upper right-hand corner is a artist's drawing of a microreactor concept. I'm told it came out of the Air Force staff at some place. I haven't been able to trace that. All I know is it's a very interesting idea from a design point of view, because it shows a small reactor inside of a ball that really is a protective enclosure that would make it possible for you to be able to do some inspection or some maintenance work if it was necessary. Make it easier. We don't really know what industry like Westinghouse or Hydromine or NuScale or some of these companies might offer until we get more serious about a specific customer. And the reason why we're going to end up talking about Creech as the likely first customer to buy something that can be used to power a production power capability independent of the grid is because without customers, our whole economy doesn't work. We have to have people willing to buy what you're willing to offer. And if the nuclear power engineering companies like Westinghouse and GE and others have been reluctant to spend their money in the past, some people will argue that they're waiting for DOE money to be spent. I mean, why should they spend company money if the federal government's going to go pay for everything? This radical idea of saying, don't spend any more taxes, let's get this thing going on a public-private partnership approach, and let's use the money that's already been collected to power up the to get started to build the recycling center and to start doing some systems engineering work. Because if Westinghouse or GE or Hydromine or NuScale were in the audience today, and unfortunately none of them are, as far as I know, if they were here, their first question would be, where's your specification sheet? What do you want? And you can't just say, I want a nuclear power plant. Well, no, it's a little more complicated than that. It requires a specific need statement, and it requires something that's priced out that they can figure out. And then I'm not going to belabor the point, but I'm going to jump to it ahead of time. I'm a big proponent saying, why should we spend a couple of $100 million for the very first small nuclear reactor for Creech if the company can find the sufficient capital investment that would lease it to them, with the idea that this becomes the standard for certain segments of the military installation, and what they're really talking about is a quantity of 100 or a quantity of 1,000 units, which gets you really serious in terms of what the unit cost winds up being. And having participated in quite a few contract vehicles in my career, I can tell you that you'd be surprised at what you can do with a public-partner-private partnership arrangement if you really are serious to doing it that way, because people like to invest their money in something that's going to pay them back in a reasonable period of time. And if you have a few hundred military installations that are likely to be interested in buying one of these things, and they'd rather lease it instead of own it because they don't want to have to maintain it themselves. And besides, it might be to your advantage to lease it instead of own it, because then you can upgrade it and you can modernize it based upon your terms and conditions without having to get all these specifications approved by somebody who owns something. There's all kinds of discussions we could have about what would be the acquisition strategy for something like a small nuclear reactor tied to a microgrid. And it gets very interesting, and there's some very powerful arguments to make it work. So you see here a generic microgrid layout. We have opened the door, but we have not reached the kind of synergy that we have with NDIA, but we really do need help from NDIA as well as our own initiative to get the microgrid community to partner with us, because if nothing else, they'll make a whole lot more money if they partner with us early on, and we get those microgrids designed in such a way so that they anticipate there'll be a nuclear power plant tied into their grid, their microgrid. Most of these microgrids that you read about in the publications and on the web and at the conferences are tied to solar and wind, which is a trivial amount of power control compared to a small reactor. So it will take some significant engineering investment by the microgrid companies to deal with a multiplicity of maybe a combination of solar, wind, and nuclear controlled by the microgrid. And they're not tuned into that yet, but I have no doubt that the people in that market will salivate as soon as they get the idea that this really might be a real possibility. And we don't want the military or any other customer to have to do this systems integration. This needs to be done by the industry and offered as a product. I'm just about done. Grid independence is possible. So think of a giant battery. You like that picture? It's the way it works. Now, all of these small reactors are not designed to last 30 years without refueling. I mean, it takes some special engineering, and maybe Craig Smith will be able to talk to that if he wants later. But some systems could last up to 30 years, they estimate, without being refueled. Imagine you've got an outpost in the Arctic Circle that needs electricity. And you don't want to run diesel generators and have a pipeline to run fuel to it. And there's no chance in hell that you'll ever get a gas pipeline up there. So what perfect solution would there be, as you can see from this remote site there, with a climate-controlled environment with a small reactor that doesn't have to be refueled frequently, right? What a difference that would make. Are you aware that the test site is already working with a couple of the national labs to build space engines for the spacecraft of the future using small nuclear reactors? They're already testing them. Some of the lessons learned from the, you probably don't think about it, but these solar panels, in space, are not a satisfactory solution for long-term power for anything if you want to do space exploration. You'd have to have a small nuclear reactor that was not tethered back to the home world if you were going to have any independent power. So you see the General Atomics device down there and the Westinghouse device. These are very realistic drawings that they would like to build, I'm told, but they need a customer. And the obvious question they would give the customer is this what you want? What do you want it to do? How much power do you want from it? Craig Smith and I have collaborated on this, and he basically has said probably a 10 megawatt system would be about what Craig would need, but we don't, Creech would need, but we don't know that for sure. Creech is going to have to tell us how much they need and how much growth they expect, so that the product can be matched to the offer. And of course, they would have loved to do that for years in the past, but nobody cared. I mean, even if they came up with such a specification, who did give it to? Who could act on it, right? The Air Force has wanted to do this for years and years and years, but the Secretary of Energy didn't want to talk about it. President didn't want to talk about it. National Security Council didn't see a threat to solve. So it didn't go anywhere. It just becomes another academic exercise until there's a sense of urgency put into it. Okay, here's a picture of Creech with its main weapon system, the MQ weapon system up there. You see some possible candidates for a unit for Creech, but these are just pie in the sky thinking that could be defined more specifically. All the three of these companies, Westinghouse, General Atomics, and NuScale, they all have experience. I mean, they know how to build this stuff. They know how. And there are others, many others, about 30 to 40 different designs that we've run into worldwide. But from a U.S. Company point of view, there's probably, I don't know, Craig, 5 to 10 companies might have realistic designs, I'm guessing. So the concepts are there. The question is who's going to be the customer? Notice I've outlined the basic needs. I'm going to read these because those of you in the back may not be able to read them. I'm guessing 10 to 20 megawatts of clean, assured, uninterruptible power is needed by Creech and other facilities. Although Creech is kind of unique because, it's really kind of self-contained. It doesn't have a multi-mission role. Doesn't like it to have B-52 bombers as well as RPVs or whatever. It's not a complex base structure like Andrews Air Force or Andrews Joint Base. And when you really go across the U.S., you find that most of the surviving military bases are very complex structures, much more complex than Creech. Creech is a lot easier place to start and to build a solution for, and then lessons learned from that. I stuck my neck way out here and I said, hey, it could be operational in 2 to 4 years. Well, that would take more than a minor miracle to make that happen in 2 to 4 years, but it could happen. It could happen. And one of the reasons why is because the military installation does not have to comply with all the regulations that a civilian installation has to comply with. That's a really big deal. We don't know yet exactly what the regulations would be by the NRC for such an installation, but with the current administration, our guess is that they could be cut to the bare bones so that it would not cost like it has been. It almost doubles the cost of building a regular nuclear power plant with the regulations they have to go through. Time and cost. I'm going to emphasize again, I'm really pushing from my own personal point of view, people to consider lease versus purchase. One of the reasons for that is the cost would be in very high cost. It's a different kind of money from a government point of view. Leasing costs can be found easier, or the money for leasing can be found much easier than money to buy. And buying it builds a burden to the owner of the property to then have to care for it and maybe have to worry about upgrades and a whole bunch of other stuff that leasing can get by. And under the circumstances, I feel very strongly that leasing would be the easiest way to get started. By the way, you've heard that the current administration has said we want to dominate energy in all of the market segments, including nuclear. If you want to sell these devices to the world market, leasing is a far better solution than selling. It could even be a better solution. Well, just imagine that if an American company was selling to Uganda or some other place in Africa or South America, imagine what a difference it would make if the property is still owned by the manufacturer or by a sub and is leased, and the State Department and the federal government has some control over how it works in case they turn rogue or try to steal it or whatever. I mean, there's all kinds of problems if you put these nuclear reactors in overseas areas that leasing could help overcome, not the least of which is non-proliferation. Okay, and leasing, of course, would include life cycle logistics and security support. My reason for pushing that early is because of my experience in the military, which hasn't changed, and that is the military does not want to own people that have such peculiar scientific knowledge about maintaining a small reactor that's state-of-the-art when there's no reason to have to train them in that sort of thing. It'd be far better to have a qualified contractor. When I used to be the chief of supply at Zweibrücken Air Base, Germany, back in the 70s, and most of our sensor systems on the RF-4C reconnaissance aircraft that we were supporting were actually run by contractors, not by military. We flew the airplanes. Our uniformed pilots would fly the airplanes, but the sophisticated sensor systems were run by contractors. There's all kinds of precedents for that. I also mentioned in passing on this slide is that Colonel Cheater, the wing commander at Creech, had mentioned to me when I was out there on the base tour recently that that he'd like to be sure to have a proposal or plans by anybody working in this area to include their solar farm, because their solar farm is still useful for them in the short run as well as maybe in the long run. And that's obviously something that would be considered as part of the microgrid configuration. I want you to know a little bit more about Creech. Here's a short clip.
What's little known about that operation that took just over 2 months to free Manbij from the control of ISIS is that air crews flying U.S. Air Force MQ-1Bs and MQ-9s, provided over 11,000 hours of persistent attack and reconnaissance and direct support of the partnered force on the ground. That's over 500 sorties from our cockpits in the continental United States.
I think the most difficult thing about being a sensor operator during this offensive was keeping mentally, physically focused on what was going on. Because at any given time, we were sent over to help out if we were nearby. And I always had to be mentally prepared to release weapons and to get rid of the enemy assets to make sure our guys on the ground were safe.
One of the things that's important to remember about going after and really getting to the heart of what was going on in Man Beach is that the people that we were fighting were not the residents of Man Beach. Ultimately, we wanted as much as possible, I think, as a fighting force for them to have a home to go back to.
Most of the action was on the outskirts of the town, so a lot of it was small villages, open country. As they pushed in towards July, they actually were able to encircle the city and began the offensive in a more difficult environment, and were able to provide full motion video and a better situational awareness of the battlefield. We also don't have to do aerial refueling. We're able to stay on station for 20 hours at a time and provide a constant overwatch for the friendly forces.
One of the things that I saw in Man Beach that I thought was truly unique was the proximity, where we can be a lot more precise with the weapon. So we can have the effect that we need to have, which is to strike at enemy forces, to strike at enemy vehicles, enemy weapons, caches or something like that, without turning an entire building into rubble.
MQ-1 and 9 air crews employed over 300 Hellfires. That's over 40% of the total of kinetic strikes executed by any coalition platform.
It was very rewarding for my squadron to see the results of their disciplined use of air power. When, in late August, we saw the video that was coming out of Man Beach, the video of the men, women, and children reclaiming their city, they were very happy to be free from ISIS rule. And we were absolutely proud to play a critical part in the liberation of this city and to making their lives better.
For the past 70 years, the Air Force has been breaking barriers as a member of the finest joint warfighting team on the planet. And what that joint warfighting team accomplished in Man Beach, with our coalition partners in the air and partnered forces on the ground, is evidence of the fact that the military defeat of ISIS is inevitable.
Imagine, it's hard for me to grasp. After spending 3 years in Southeast Asia and 5 years during the Cold War in the 70s in Europe and in NATO, it's hard for me to imagine going home to your family after fighting a war scenario and dropping bombs on an enemy. That's really, really different. It's really different. And Creech deserves all the support we could give it. All right. One of the number one questions I get is, but won't it be just too expensive for these small reactors to produce power? I mean, after all, everybody knows how cheap natural gas is and how fracking has changed the basic energy market and so forth and so on. But they haven't really studied the energy markets very well, because what the Department of Energy's information shows that even though the volume of natural gas is going to skyrocket in the next 20 to 40 years, the price is not going to go down. Why is that? It's just like OPEC. It's economics, because they can make it. They can charge more when you open up the global market to the price factors. It's always stunned me when I spent those 5 years in Europe, how much Europeans pay for gasoline and how much we paid. And it's taxes and it's all kinds of surcharges, and it's just a ripoff is what it is. It was just driving me nuts to pay that much money for gasoline when I was in Europe. But a lot of people are used to it, okay? And you can't blame the petroleum companies for pricing their product for what people are willing to pay. That's the way the market system works. I don't like some pieces of it, but that part of it is the real world. So the nuclear power systems are going to have to be competitive in the future. How do they get competitive? They're going to have to be real smart about designing their manufacturing lines. One of the things that we show that we're hoping that NDIA can help us on is to work with the nuclear power companies, nuclear manufacturing companies, to maximize the amount of robotics and automated assembly line processes so that you minimize the cost. I'm advocating that we set up this energy park along the border with the test site so that companies are encouraged to build their manufacturing plant in northern Nevada, in northern part of Las Vegas. Between North Las Vegas and the test site, there's all kinds of room to where small manufacturing, small reactors could be built. And if the companies are going to go into production line manufacturing, where are they going to build those factories? In today's world, remember that one of the processes will be to recycle the spent fuel, turn that into modern fuel, and each one of these reactors require a little bit different configuration. So what comes out of that recycling process is customized fuel for the reactors. This would be ideal to have it closely located from a manufacturing point of view. And there are all kinds of things that Nevada, from a political point of view, if they got smart about it, as well as Department of Energy, could do with terms of land space, either private or co-located at the test site, so that you could incentivize companies to want to build their manufacturing plants along that 95 corridor. Think of what that would do for the economy in southern Nevada. It's staggering when you think about it. And don't forget that one of the things that has to be decided is these small reactors are going, especially if they're transportable, they're going to have to be fail-safe. I mean, if all of the complaints we hear about, well, what if it fell out of an airplane, or what if there was a train wreck, or what if? There's been so much work done on that thing during the past 40 years that, in terms of making the idea safe in terms of shipping the material, that doesn't worry me at all. But quite frankly, when you start manufacturing the small reactor, you've got another process to go through to make sure it's been tested, and the test site's the ideal place to test this kind of product. Where else would you do that? Boston? I don't think so. Los Angeles? I don't think so. San Francisco? I don't think so. Yeah. Okay, I'm just about done. Finishing up with the green community, the environmentalists. You probably can't read this, but I'm going to read this to you because I think it's important enough for you to take away and read the whole article. But there's a guy named Michael Schellenberger, and I'd like for you to remember that name because he's one of the leaders and most powerful speakers on pro-nuclear über alles, against solar, against wind, against geothermal, against everything else. Nuclear power is the answer from an environmentalist point of view because it does the most to purify the air, the land, and the water. So he says, and by the way, he and I probably, who will probably meet in the future, but we communicate by email right now. But he and I could agree on pro-nuclear, but there's probably little else we could agree on because he has a quite different political agenda than I do. But I don't care. As long as we can pull the nation together and get nuclear power in its rightful place in terms of energy for our country and to save our save our national security infrastructure, then that's a good thing. And we can forget about where we disagree because that's not worthy of problem. If you ever saw any of his, are you familiar with TED speeches on the internet? TED, Ted? He does a lot of, if you look up Michael Schellenberger, you'd be amazed at what he's already done, and you'd be amazed at what he says. It's very impressive. Anyway, so he says here, momentum builds for nuclear power with referendum approved in Taiwan and the Pride Fest in Germany. Quote, the fest was organized by a coalition of 12 pro-nuclear European NGOs, those are non-government organizations, hours after, whoops, what happened here? I pushed the wrong button. Hold on. I'm not going to be able to read that if I can't get to it. Here we go. All right. Hours after pro-nuclear activists from Europe and the United States rallied in Germany, Taiwan's Electrical Commission gave the green light to a November referendum on the future of nuclear power. A victory in Taiwan to restart closed nuclear reactors would boost similar efforts in Japan, which is struggling to reopen nuclear plants in the face of continuing post-Fukushima affairs, and in South Korea, whose anti-nuclear president has sought to reduce the nation's use of the technology. Taiwan would need 617 solar farms, the size of its largest proposed solar farm, the scientists noted, at a cost of $71 billion. $71 billion to replace its nuclear power reactors. A sum does not include the cost of batteries or land. And if you've ever been to Taiwan, you know land is a really big deal. Really big deal. And Julie, being from Taiwan, can tell you more about that. Aside from Germany's active efforts to close its nuclear plants and those of its neighbors, the European Union's Renewable Energy Directive actively discriminates against nuclear in favor of solar and wind. And guess what, folks? So does our Nevada legislature. It prohibits nuclear power in the state of Nevada. And we citizens tolerate that. We didn't have much choice in the past, and it will be difficult to solve that policy process in the future. But that's another part of what Nevada's CAN is all about, is to tackle the policy process at all levels, including Nevada, regardless of party. Okay, I'm going to finish up now. Summarize. What I've tried to tell you, what happened? I lost it? Hello back there in the control room. I lost my final summary slide. There we go, thank you. Magic, huh? What I've tried to tell you, what I've tried to lay the foundation for is that Nevada's CAN is a leading growing national coalition to establish Nevada as a national center for carbon-free energy. We are not dumb enough to think that we can do this by ourselves, and we don't want to. We're building a network of organizations, of which NDIA and the American Nuclear Society are the initial ones. We would like to have dozens of national coalition members in order to start writing Congress and finally having an impact. Now, we happen to know that Congress would like to get their waste, they call waste, again, it's 97% reusable, but they'd like to get their waste moved somewhere, and Yucca Mountain or any place, they don't care where, just get it out of here. And then you put a little pressure on them, and this is why I'm going to call Jim Moshana up here to help us fill that in as a conclusion, okay, on a political scheme. If you might want to come on up, Jim, if you don't mind. But the fact is that we believe that it's possible to deal with the politics, and we believe it's possible to build a rapid implementation plan for Creech as a direct result of the other things that are going on because it fits into the puzzle. It's a piece of the puzzle. Okay, Jim? Thank you. Is it on? Jim?
How about now? Now.
I didn't tell which district you were from, but
37.
37, okay.
I guess what he wants me to talk to you about is our what we've been doing to try to advance our narrative here and our dream in Washington. I guess met Bob about probably, 4 or 5 years ago. He started telling me about small modular reactors then, and I knew it was a good idea, and I wanted to advance it, but the political climate back then didn't allow it. Now that we've got President Trump in there, I think we've got an opportunity to push this. So we started the process with Yucca Mountain, how to address that, and through formulating this idea, we dreamed about our carbon-free energy research park, a Livermore lab-type world-class research and development center, and our challenge was, how do we get this done politically? And it's something that, as a legislator here in Nevada, I decided to try to help as much as I could. So I was able to establish some relationships in Washington and convince them that what we were doing out here was the right thing to do, not only for Nevada, but for the country as far as national security and then energy security and then being able to provide energy all the way around. So been to Washington a few times. I've met with Chairman Shimkus of the Environmental Committee under the Energy Committee. I've met with Congressman Walden, who is the chairman of the Energy Committee with the House. I've also met with the main staff guys with the Energy and Commerce Committee on the Senate side. And every one of them were very, very receptive to the point of almost being excited about what we were doing here. So we want to continue to pursue that and push that with them. We've got a little issue right now in that we lost the House in this past election. So we're going to have to figure out how to I guess, navigate that. Still think we can. I think we've got enough people up there that want to do the right thing. So that's something we're going to continue. So that's what I've been doing, and I'm going to continue to do it and see if we can make this happen, because it would be a great thing, not only for Nevada, but the United States, and certainly national security. We definitely need that, and what Bob's talking about. I, for one, do not want the Chinese leading in this technology. I think that we should do it. So I'm going to do all I can to keep it going.
Thanks, Jim. You mentioned that Congressman Amodei has been supporting us. He's more than just supporting us. He's more than giving us just a political glad hand. He's really working in the Appropriations Committee to help us.
Well, yeah, to follow up on that, and I should have mentioned him right off the bat, because he's the one we initially went to show him this plan, and outstandingly, he agreed with it, loved it, to the point where he actually put an amendment, which is our narrative here, into the H.R. 3053 bill, which was voted on last year, probably around, about a year ago this time. And so politically, what happened was our senator at the time, Heller, was so worried about his election that he said, well, I don't want anything to do with Yucca Mountain, so we're going to kill it. So they basically figured out a way politically through political maneuverings within the House to kill that part of the bill. And it was actually a technicality, a parliamentarian technicality that got it out, which is hardly ever done. But anyway, it was stripped out of the bill. Congressman Amodei was very upset. And he's on the Appropriations Committee, so he snuck it in an appropriations bill, and it actually passed. So that's where we're at now. Now with the lame duck session here, we're hoping that we can get it passed through the Senate. And I've been told by those in Washington that that is their goal. That's what they're going to try to do, and hopefully before January 20th when the new Congress takes over. So hopefully we can get that done.
There's a, just give me a second, Robert. There's an interesting part of that discussion that relates to the fact that I mentioned it before, but if you didn't hear me, I'll repeat it. DOE, Department of Energy, has somewhere between 30 and $40 billion collected from the states, the ratepayers, where the nuclear power plants have been operating and accumulating their spent fuel rods. And that money was supposed to be used to get those fuel rods moved to a national repository. But we have reason to believe that it could be used for related functions. We also know that between the Department of Energy and the Justice Department, that they've been paying duty to some states who have sued them for not having Yucca Mountain open past the deadline. Not all the states that have spent fuel are as equally agitated at having it, because some of the states are actually paid duty, paid cash, because we haven't opened up a repository for them to vacate the spent fuels. There is a reason to believe that if Department of Energy would change its policy, and we may be calling upon any of those you in the audience and others who would like to engage in the process to write to Secretary Perry and say, we'd like to see the policy changed from a permanent dump to recycling. That's necessary in order for Congress to authorize the money. That probably requires an amendment to the current bill, the current law, but it may require the law to be replaced. That's, as they like to say, above our pay grade. And it may require an executive order by the president to simply declare what's going to happen, and then DOE does it. But that's, that process is understood, but it hasn't been executed yet. But it needs to be done so that anything that's done here in Nevada can be justified based upon the fact that you've changed the policy from a dump to recycling to carbon-free energy and so forth, okay? While that is being said, as Jim pointed out earlier, the vast majority of the House of Representatives have already voted in the previous bill to activate the law and to move the waste material to Yucca Mountain. They've already voted to do that. Tremendously bipartisan issue, okay? And it's believed, and this is a very fine point, but it's believed that if just one state is authorized to start moving material to Nevada, to the test site, for temporary storage, pending a recycling plan, that will dry up all the money being wasted to the other states who are getting paid because there's no Yucca Mountain. That's a big deal, okay, because you don't have to get everybody to agree to it. But politically, both sides of the aisle are going to be, if they play their cards right, can be motivated to get behind our carbon-free energy plan in Nevada, because it solves the decision about what are you going to do with the so-called waste. It sets up a schedule for moving it. It will allow the money, the $40 billion, to also include about $250 million to $300 million necessary to build the reprocessing plant. And it will get us started on the policy process that we're talking about in terms of the overall plan. Now, will this make it possible for Creech to get their small modular reactor faster? We think so. But if they don't do this, we're not about to back off and support Creech in getting something, but I'm worried that it will take longer to get it done if they don't change the policy. So we're going to push the policy at the same time. Do we feel all the cracks?
Yeah, one of the things when I first met with Congressman Shimkus, to follow up on what Bob was saying, he pulled out a little frame, and in that frame was some numbers. It was 340-72. And that was the vote in the House to open up Yucca Mountain to start the licensing process again to become a dump. And I said, I'm on your side. I said, I'm trying to, for us not to be a dump. He said, well, we would rather call it a repository. I said, we like to call it a dump in Nevada, because that's what it is, and we don't want to be a dump. So if you would take what our plan here, that's what we would like to do in Nevada. And he said, finally, somebody in Nevada is telling us what they want. So, you know, thanks to what we've done here, hopefully that will be the course of action that they take. I'm sure going to work hard to make sure that happens.
Thank you. And as a concluding remark in this area, we've had a bit of a dialogue with Nye County for a number of years about whether it would be smart to go ahead and implement the current law, which calls for a repository and allows for things to be retrieved, or not, or change or modify the law or replace the law. And my response has been, up till now, having worked on legislation when I was in the air staff, as a supply officer on the air staff, I had to go over and talk to Congress all the time. I got beat up on the $700 toilet seat. I had to go over to Congress and explain why we bought a $700 toilet seat. That's a whole different story. But and the Air Force didn't do it. DLA did it, but that's a different part of it. But anyway, the issue is that we need to move forward with the DOE policy. The DOE policy is out of date. We're getting speeches by the president. We're getting speeches, as you saw, by Secretary Perry, saying we consider it a renewable resource. We consider possibly Nevada would be a location for temporary storage. Can you imagine how silly it would be to waste maybe $1 billion to move some of the waste to New Mexico, if then you had to move it again from New Mexico to Nevada someday? Why would you do that? Why not get on with the job, reprocess it, go ahead and move it to Nevada? We've got plenty of space to put it. It's not going to hurt anybody. It's not going to harm anybody. It's certainly a lot less safer than having it stored right by the ocean, which is where most of these are.
Yeah, right now, they're stored at 121 sites across the country, and that was something that Chairman Shimkus made sure that I was aware of, and so he said, look, you know, your state is not going to win this battle. And I said, I agree with you, but we want something more than just being a dump.
So anyway, we're now going to transition to questions. I'm going to ask Dr. Craig Smith to join us up here, and Assemblyman Marchant and I and Dr. Smith will attempt to field your questions. So, do we have any questions? Rupert.
I'm going to need about an hour of your time, so I'll let other people go ahead.
Okay. Next, yes. Wait, we've got a mic coming. We need to have your question on the record.
Thank you. Denise Mraz. So I attended the Rad Waste Summit in September and had quite an audience with DOE and Rod McCullum. I'm sure you've talked to them. And we kind of came up with a little plan. And the plan was to possibly take the CIS process, apply it to Yucca Mountain, because that's a very short licensing horizon. It's 2 years or less. And that way we can be moving material here until the longer process of getting the energy park and all of the activities that we want to do can transpire. So I just wanted your thoughts on that, because when it was vetted at the Rad Waste Summit, I had a lot of support for the idea. What do you think?
When I've had these questions before, the answer was it'd be very difficult to get the Nevada politicians of any stripe to agree to accept temporary storage without a commitment to building a recycling plant so it could be moved out again. And so that will be, to me, the smart way to deal with it would be to simply say, the idea it's going to be recycled because we need it for the new generation reactors. that recycling plant ought to be close to where the temporary storage is going to be. Temporary in this case meaning less than 50 years, okay? Maybe less than 30. But it kills the whole argument about, well, what about earthquakes? What about water contamination? What about blah? What about? All that goes away when you go away from the dump idea and 100,000 or 1 million year storage. Did I answer your question or not? Okay. Next question.
Mike is on its way.
Wait, I want to give these two gentlemen a chance to comment on that also because it's a political question.
I agree with what you said.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's.
Craig Smith is what, 4th-generation Nevadan, right?
That's right. No, I'd say I also agree that this is a question of practicality rather than regulatory requirements. I mean, let's face it, we have regulatory authority to move these kinds of material. The laws are very well understood. The containers are very well qualified. We can obviously store these materials. We're doing it at 120 different sites around the country already. But we do have this political, practical political question here. And the beauty of this program, at least in one way of looking at it, is if you go through and look at all of the objections that have been lodged against the Yucca Mountain concept from the beginning, this plan basically addresses almost all of them. 99% of it anyway. So I think it really is, it's a practical question, political question rather than a regulatory one.
And for me politically, I don't want to give up our leverage, because if we start letting them just move it in here, they'll just say, well, we'll get around to your other part later. So I don't want to give that up.
Next question.
Okay. So
could you mind mentioning your name again, please?
Sure. Greg Friesmuth, entrepreneur interested in this. And my question, I guess, is I built a small modular reactor like in my garage. Okay, let's just say I built it, it was ready to ship to produce power for, say, Creech Air Force Base. I funded it myself, you know, I saved my pennies and I paid for it. What would stop me from actually deploying that and producing energy for these applications?
Well, first of all, you gotta get fuel from somewhere, right?
Sure. So
it's not easy. Go ahead, Rick.
Ask Hillary. Yeah, you certainly do need the fuel, and there are probably other steps along the way that would make it very difficult to do this in your garage. There's a slew of federal regulations that specify things that have to be done to license a design or to operate a plant. And I think Bob spoke to that a little bit to say that in the case of a military site where the plant is sited at a military base, Department of Defense property, and it's not engaged in the commercial process of selling power to the grid, that it's believed that the licensing process would not necessarily go to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, but the laws and restrictions and requirements in the Code of Federal Regulations still have to be complied with, but it would be the military that would handle that. And that means that it's not necessarily becomes an easy process, but it becomes a process that's under the control of the DoD in this case, and therefore a lot of the uncertainty that is regulatory in nature that drives up costs, would be at least reduced.
So you're saying it would have it's two different paths, one to deploy it to a military base.
If you're deploying this to a commercial operation, it will need to go through the licensing process of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And that's a very slow and onerous process. And I can tell you right now that if the reactor that you're building and you're planning to build in your garage deviates in a significant way from what the NRC is used to handling, they'll probably tell you that, well, it's going to take us 2 or 3 years to hire experts with that technology, bring them up to speed.
At his expense, right?
And then we'll be ready to consider an application.
Right.
You know, so this is one of the issues that
I want to highlight the fact, your first burden would be, can I build this in my garage at all, even if I never sell it to anybody, right?
I mean that sort of hyperbolically.
I know.
I don't like. I'm just saying, if you privately funded, I think I see a lot of development coming through and trying to find funding through government sources. What if this was like completely privately funded, independently of any sort of operation? What would stop that from coming into existence?
There's another way to approach that. If you could get a contract with Westinghouse and tag into their licensing procedure, you might be able to make some progress as a sub or as a wholly owned small company or whatever. But you're going to have to probably, is that fair to say, Craig, have to use the companies that already have been through the process of approval to build nuclear power plants at all?
Well, you'd have to use companies that have that expertise,
Yeah.
whether they're an established company or a new one. One of the companies that I've been in communication with in the last couple of weeks in anticipation of this meeting has a small modular reactor, which is probably the most creative and advanced one that I know of. And they sent me a development plan that they're working off of, which had 3 steps. The first step is to create basically a micro-reactor design, 5 to 15 megawatt output, but to build that reactor without any nuclear fuel. And instead of nuclear fuel, put in electric heating devices so that everything could be thoroughly tested. Now, you wouldn't necessarily need a license to do that. I mean, you need to go through your normal industrial safety process. Step 2 would be to do the same thing again, but in this case with fuel. That's where you go into the regulations and requirements that you have to comply with. And then the third step is to go big with that. It's still a small reactor, but instead of it being in the 5 to 15 megawatt arena, it would be a 200 megawatt system. So that's the kind of developmental process that people have in mind. But even once you get to that endpoint, you're still going to need to license that system for its operation. And if it's for commercial use, it would go through the Nuclear Regulatory Commission.
What's the average expectation of that process when you gain a full operating license?
Well, there's a lot of uncertainties associated with that, and I spoke with a number of companies this last week, NuScale, Westinghouse, Hydromine, a couple of others, and tried to pin them down on that for the particular application. And I only got the one development plan, and I think they were thinking along the lines of 6 years.
What was the last?
Wait, hold. We're going to bring you a mic because nobody can hear your question in the back here. We've got a mic.
What was the length of time it took the last commercially nuclear plant that was licensed commercially in the United States to come on stream from date of inception to date of first operation?
I don't have the exact answer for that, but 10 to 20 years is not unheard of.
That was what I was thinking.
And there actually are there's at least one new plant that's in that process right now, a Westinghouse plant, which has encountered finance and scheduling difficulties and contributed to Westinghouse going through a bankruptcy proceeding. So very complicated, very difficult. On the other hand, what can be done in a responsible way? The Koreans, South Koreans, have basically implemented very similar Generation 3 water-cooled reactor technology to ours, and were able to, in the international arena, sell 4 units, 4 plants to the United Arab Emirates. with I believe, a 4-year schedule and a budget. And to my knowledge, they have met or exceeded the schedule and budget restrictions that they had. So that kind of gives you an idea of what can be done.
Craig, could I apologize to the audience because I was going to have him introduce what his responsibilities are from a national lead-cooled reactor consortium, because most people don't realize what you do besides teach at Monterey.
Okay, so while I was program leader at Lawrence Livermore Lab, I was given responsibility of developing a new generation of reactors. This was really before SMRs became an acceptable topic and before the Generation 4 program had begun. And we put together a team that looked at all the different kinds of potential reactors that could be small and transportable and to operate with a very long core life for the main reason of avoiding the proliferation risk issue that people get concerned about for deploying reactors to the far corners of the world, to any country. And so we developed this, one of the concepts that Bob talked about, which is SSTAR. And at the end of that process, the Generation 4 program came along. The Department of Energy asked me to organize a committee, international committee, on one of the technologies which we had identified as the most promising, and that's the lead-cooled fast reactor. And so I did that and subsequently left the DOE family, went to work for the Navy, and the DOE decided they wanted to keep me involved in that, and so they fund some work that I do through an interagency transfer, and I've been doing that for many years. So that's the context.
Yeah, so the point is he has frequent contact with the scientists of the world in small reactors as well as the industry players. And so he is a door to knowledge that we normally just can't pick up off of reading the normal material.
I'd also say that I'm a nuclear engineer, so I'm kind of in favor of all the different kinds of nuclear reactors that might be out there, but I do have my opinions. You know, we have a mainline concept for nuclear reactors. It's light water cooled nuclear reactors. They're deployed all over the world. They represent 20% of the electricity we create in this country. They've been very safe by record. There have been severe accidents, but in comparison to other human activities, I don't think there's anything that compares. We've run hundreds of these reactors for decades on our ships without severe incident. The Russians have had a few accidents, but in their program, but they don't have the same standards that we do. But globally, light water reactors work very well. They're very capable, but there is a problem with them, and that is that when you operate them at the temperature that you need to operate them to get even a modest efficiency out of them, the water doesn't want to be in the liquid state. It wants to be a gas, and that's not a very effective way to remove heat. And if you let it get to that state, the fuel will melt and you'll have an accident. So there's something fundamentally problematic with that coolant, and it doesn't mean it's not safe. You just have to put on a lot of extra bells and whistles to make sure that things don't go awry. So you start asking, what other kinds of things could you use to cool a large reactor and have it be safe? And so we've gone through all of that, at least to my satisfaction. I know Westinghouse Corporation has had independently done the same thing. We both came to the same conclusion, and that is that you could look at sodium. We've built sodium reactors since the 1950s, and it works really well. But there's a couple problems. Sodium reacts with water and air, could be explosive. It also will boil. So it boils at a pretty high temperature, but not so high that you don't have to take into account the safety issues associated with it. If you go to lead, which the Soviets had a lot of experience with, you have a coolant that has such a high boiling temperature that you would never achieve that. I mean, if you ever got to the boiling temperature, everything else would have melted in the reactor. It's just not, boiling is just not a concern. You also have a material which is relatively inert when it comes into contact with air and water. So there are fundamental characteristics that make that a very advantageous system. So anyway, that's just my my little speech on lead-cooled reactors. Most people don't know much about them, but it's a very promising technology.
Jim, did somebody raise their hand that they're from the test site? You're from the test, yeah. Jim has been working with the management of the Nevada test site because we don't want to surprise them either, right?
Correct. We've been
forgot to
working.
mention that. You probably ought to mention that relationship.
Yeah, we've been working very closely with MSTS, I guess the contractor at the test site, Mark Martinez specifically, and some others out there, and kind of enlightening them to our idea and seeing if there's any way that we could possibly join together or learn exactly what they need and what they want so we can incorporate it in our plan. So yeah, we definitely would like to include them in anything we do. I think we have to, especially if they're going to be the ones that do the testing. And Mr. Martinez out there kind of agrees with us. There's no better place on earth to test all of this because he can actually test it to failure. I don't think anybody else can do that in the country. So there is no better place than here to do all the research and development that we want to do for anything that deals with storing the material at Yucca Mountain or building these new small modular reactors.
And you all understand the significant difference between the basic research that Dr. Smith was involved in at Livermore from a design point of view, and that Los Alamos has been doing, and Idaho Falls and so forth, and bringing that together with microgrids and building an integrated system that then could be sold to a customer like Creech Air Force Base, right? And that's what we're talking about could be done in Nevada, is pull these pieces together to where you wind up with something that can be sold and used and maintained. That's not happening anywhere in the country right now, to my knowledge. And
Right.
Really
One of the other things, I went on a tour back in February of the test site. One of the things that they told us is they are actually working in conjunction with other labs around the country to build a small modular reactor to power Mars, to actually be the electric generation facility on Mars. It's called Krusty, Krusty. And they're actually building that out there, or helping build that out there at the test site.
I got it. Okay. We just been advised that we're going to be closing up at 7. That was a little earlier than we expected, but that's okay. We're done. We're just about done anyway. I'll talk to you separately if that's okay. Well, Robert, I just wanted to have a chance to tie it together, some end pieces here, if you don't mind, from the presentation point of view. What I hope you take away from this is the fact that we are building a true coalition, a network of interested parties, and we need all the help we can get, because it's such a political issue that it takes a whole lot of people to be supporting such a, as you would say, ambitious program, okay? And it'd be a whole lot easier if all of our Nevada's politicians were supporting us like the politicians in Idaho or New Mexico or some other place, but we don't have that yet. But the point, well, I'm not going to go that far because every time I talk to Senator Heller, I always said, why do you always talk about the dump? I'm going to give you a chance to say, I win. You win. There's not going to be a dump. Now we're going to talk about recycling. Let's get on with it. and he won't talk about that, and neither will some other people. That's what we have to challenge. We have to keep throwing recycling back in their face, saying, dump is dead, thank you very much, we're not going to do that. But the DOE has to change the policy. You need to walk out here and understand that until the DOE tells the Congress that they want to change the policy, it's probably not going to happen. And so I would like a chance to meet some of the Air Force people in January to help us get the people in DOE and probably DHS. I mean, think about it just for a second. We've talked about CREACH, we've talked about national military installations, about separate from the grid, but we haven't talked at all about FEMA and what it has to do about disaster response and how a transportable small micro reactor would be for national emergencies, okay? So there's all kinds of spin-offs that could be worked, but we want to get too diverted, but there's plenty of money in the government right now if they realized what they want to do with it. There's some smart ways to spend it, but trying to raise taxes is not the right way. Okay, any concluding comments from either of you gentlemen here before we finish up?
Thank you for being here.
I have a question. You were talking about the recycling plant. Do we know how much can be generated from that recycling?
Well, we can say that you can generate all of it from that recycling. The question is, how many years are you willing to wait? Okay, and that depends on the market, on how fast you can sell the product, right? So people like to say, well, it costs more money. It takes, the Argonne National Laboratory has built a plant that we're sponsoring, saying we agree with Argonne. Let's build your pyro processing plant in Nevada as a state of the art. Better than the French and better than our previous programs. So let's do that. And the answer will be, well, they did a pricing already for South Korea of about $250 million to build the pyro processing plant in Nevada. $250 million compared to $100 billion. It works for me. And the important point is that small amount of taxpayers' money could be repaid based upon the sale of the product if you set it up right. Okay? All right, well, thank you all for coming.